Irving Fisher was born February 27, 1867, in Socrates, New York. His father was a Congregationalist minister, however, Fisher ended up later becoming an atheist. Soon after his father passed away, and to make ends meet, he lived with his younger brother and mother in an apartment near campus. In addition, Fisher tutored, competed for academic prize money, and worked on his inventions, such as a device to improve a piano's performance. In 1888, he graduated first in his class with a BA from Yale. He published poetry and works on astronomy, mechanics, and geometry, but his concentration was on mathematics and economics, the latter having no academic department at Yale at the time. After graduating, Fisher studied in Berlin and Paris for a brief period of time before returning to Yale to complete his PhD. In 1891, 3 years after completing his BA, Fisher received the first PhD granted by Yale in the study of economics. Fisher's doctoral advisors were Josiah Willard Gibbs and William Graham Sumner, who was also a doctoral advisor to the famous Norwegian-American economist Thorstein Veblen. Irving Fisher's theories were largely influenced by William Stanley Jevons, whose work paved the way for modern mathematical economics, as well as by Eugen Baum-Ritter von Barck, who was most known for his contributions to the Austrian School of Economics. Fisher's thesis was titled Mathematical Investigations in the Theory of Value and Prices and was dedicated to the memory of Eugen Baum-Ritter von Barck. It was largely focused on general equilibrium theory. In 1898, Fisher was diagnosed with tuberculosis. This was the same disease that killed his father roughly 15 years prior. It would take almost 3 years before Irving Fisher would fully recover from illness. This inspired him to become an advocate for personal health as he invented tents and special beds for tuberculosis patients and eventually went on to co-found the Life Extension Institute in 1913. Then, in 1915, Fisher co-authored a book called How to Live: Rules for Healthy Living Based on Modern Science. In the book, he was critical of alcohol, tobacco, and red meat, as he felt they were largely responsible for much of the illness seen in the early 1900s. Fisher also went on to become an outspoken proponent of prohibition, as he believed alcohol to decrease economic productivity in the population. The market crash of 1929 would be a significant downfall for Fisher, as he famously predicted that stocks had reached what looks like a permanently high plateau on October 21st, only days before the market took its largest losses to date.
A blessing in disguise. This country is fundamentally sound, and the technical situation in the stock market is not going to prevent the great improvement, progressive improvement in our wonderful.
After losing a great deal of personal wealth and irreparably damaging his academic reputation, Fisher went on to describe what he found to be his debt deflation theory, though few listened to him.
On October 29, 1929, the stock market had officially crashed. This day was known as Black Tuesday. Worldwide GDP had fallen by 15%, and unemployment in the U.S. had risen to 25%. Following the stock market crash, and in light of the ensuing Great Depression, Fisher then developed his theory of economic crises called debt deflation. This theory attributed the economic crisis to the bursting of the credit bubble. According to Fisher, the bursting of the credit bubble led to a series of events that had a negative impact on the economy. The first event in this deflation series is debt liquidation and distressed selling. This means people pay off their debts to the banks, so retailers and marketers have a harder time selling their goods and services since people have less money to spend. Next, there is contraction of the money supply as bank loans are paid off and the slowing down of velocity of circulation. Since debts are liquidated, the money originally in the market flow are now in the banks, so the amount of money in the market decreases. Less money supply means less spending. Less spending means a slowing down of the velocity of circulation. This causes a fall in the level of asset prices. According to the laws of supply and demand, a decrease in demand will lead to a surplus in the supply of goods and services. A lower level of demand leads to a reduction in price, and in this series of events, we call this price deflation. Due to the fall in prices, this then leads to a still greater fall in the net worth of businesses. The differences between the assets and liabilities of the companies become smaller and smaller, this leading to bankruptcy. Next, we have a fall in profits. Companies are forced to run at a loss unless they make the necessary changes. These changes lead to the next event in our series, a reduction in output, trade, and employment of labor. Since people are making less purchases, the companies no longer have to produce products at large scales. To minimize losses, companies must reduce output, wages, and labor. Altogether, the losses, bankruptcies, and unemployment in the economy lead to pessimism and loss of confidence. During the Great Depression, unemployment was at an all-time high. People lost hope that the economy would bounce back, and therefore took matters into their own hands. This then leads to the hoarding of money. People started saving their money, even burying it in their backyards to prevent people from finding it and stealing it. By hoarding money instead of spending it in the market and allowing transactions to happen, the velocity of the market became slowed even further. These 8 events all lead to the last part of the series. Complicated disturbances in the rates of interest, in particular a fall in the nominal or money rates and a rise in the real or commodity rates of interest. Fisher had proposed his idea of reflation to help the economy recover. However, his theories were largely ignored in favor of Keynesian economics, in part because the damage to Fisher's reputation caused by his public optimism about the stock market just prior to the crash. Aside from debt deflation, Fisher's other works have greatly impacted modern economics as we know today. Fisher is probably best remembered today in his neoclassical economics for his theory of capital, investment, and interest rates. His 1930 treatise, The Theory of Interest, summed up a lifetime's research into capital, capital budgeting, credit markets, and the factors, including inflation, that determine interest rates. However, Fisher's research into the basic theory of prices and interest rates did not touch directly on the great social issues of the day. On the other hand, his monetary economics did, and this grew to be the main focus of Fisher's mature work. Fisher's appreciation and interest was an abstract analysis of the behavior of interest rates when the price level is changing. It emphasized the distinction between real and nominal interest rates. Here we see the equation known as the Fisher equation, named in his honor, where R is the real interest rate, I is the nominal interest rate, and the inflation pi is a measure of the increase in the price level. When inflation is sufficiently low, the real interest rate can be approximated as the normal interest rate minus the expected inflation rate.
Irving Fisher's influence echoes through much of today's macroeconomic theory and events, while impacting the works of some of the most prominent figures in contemporary economic thought, including Robert Demand, Thomas Piketty, and Joseph Stiglitz. During the 2008 financial crisis, American President-elect Barack Obama parroted Fisher's insights in a radio address to the nation, stating that we are facing an economic crisis of historic proportions. We now risk falling into a deflationary spiral that could increase our massive debt even further. Fisher explained how this deflationary spiral developed into depressions in 1933, when he wrote, "Overinvestment and over-speculation are often important, but they would have far less serious results were they not conducted with borrowed money. The very effort of individuals to lessen their burden of debts increases it. Because of the mass effect of the stampede to liquidate, the more debtors pay, the more they owe." Brock University economist Robert Demand expressed that if Fisher were alive in 2008, that he would tell us we have to avoid deflation and to worry about all that inside debt. And the ideal thing is to avoid these situations. Demand's research focuses on the development of macroeconomics and the efficient market hypothesis. In Thomas Piketty's acclaimed book, Capital in the 21st Century, the French economist alludes to Irving Fisher's 1919 American Economic Association presidential address, with the fact that 2% of the population owns more than 50% of the wealth, and 2/3 owns almost nothing. Piketty's studies revolve primarily around wealth concentration and distribution over the past 250 years. Joseph Stiglitz is perhaps one of the most notable modern economists that champions Fisher's ideologies. The Columbia University professor is a former senior vice president and chief economist of the World Bank and was awarded a Nobel Prize in 2001 for his collaborative analysis of asymmetric information in markets. Stiglitz uses Fisher's debt deflation theories as guiding principles to answer these three pertinent macroeconomic questions. Why do wages in the labor market not adjust to clear the labor market? How can we explain the magnitude of fluctuations in the demand for labor, and in turn, large changes in real wages? And why do economic downturns occur in the form of unemployment? Keynes called him the great-grandparent of his own theories, and many would agree that Irving Fisher will continue to influence modern economics through his theology and eccentric celebrity. Thank you.